Molotov, you blow them up.
Real men.
Keep you doing.
Molotov.
That still is a system that still lingers.
Let's go, nigga. We drop a few bombs. Full of fire.
We gotta get to you, ready. Only way we can do it. Straight raw, you heard?
Trenton, New Jersey.
Yo! I'm deaf to the dumb shit. So if I never heard of you the type of dude that I'm allergic to. I never lost a step. I left footprints while you other rappers running. Whatever that you got, I don't want it. I'm off in that. How you grab a bait and abuse what? How you the medicine and never use what up? How you the cure and the kind of in other words, the shit, that's what you meant. The man who wrote the plan and the blueprints. Yes, exactly. Been blown up. And any beef I showed up. If you underage, just repeat after the grown up. This is a clinic, this is authentic. Pack a lunch, this shit is a picnic. Eat the bars, just bear witness. I'm oddly, godly, hardly tawny. Cause I'm better than any, some, no, and everybody. What's that nut? Double or triple. Every roll, double or triple. You hustle right, you know, doubles and triple. Overshadows the problem, we with you. Molotov, I write the news and let the speakers meet the issues.
My equations to this formula of militant mind. I'm a walking time bomb that's mathematically inclined. Yeah, my guns 4 stars and my black boots shine. Put these bastards on the leash and the bullet to their mind. I'm a white supremacist, hitman for hire. Put a soldier from the ghetto with a warrior's fire. Pigs retire, better yet to hang from the wire. Mr. Hoover still alive when our leaders expire. Skinny jeans wearing berries, I'm a revolutionary. Assassination, real crackers wanna see me buried. I'm a hot commodity, original, make a period. So go fuck the mother was, now your witness is buried. As I stand on my own and resurrect thyself, covered in the blood of God to protect myself with a spliff in my hand. Is it called my mental health? I see God in the mirror to reflect myself. Flag waving, black power, gangsta flag raising. Throwing Molotovs with that so damn we be amazing.
My brothers in Lord of Mayhem, it brings us dope. When it comes to this cheese, I am king, no pun intended. I should have big puns attendance at every function I'm in, bitch. How my city's represented. Half of you niggas living, other half been before they even started. As though I bring the art in. So I'm begging your pardon or join the dilly departed. Soon as my flight departed, use my essence just to spark shit. $10 off the extracurricular activities. My city's epitome of what these streets did to me. Made me care more about me. People's actions is thirsty. EMP concrete, praises to know and verbally. If we ain't cool nowadays, guess you didn't deserve me. The nerve of these MCs thinking they more deserving. Try to desert me like that shit there can hurt me, but not giving the fuck, they listen but never heard me.
NWO, Chichi Fire, for real. Babylon entire. Well, King Samir in the flats. Man, we are gonna murder some pussy boy in all in the tracks. Watch us there, mash up the sound, and pussy are gonna crack them face. King, come in. Well, it's one Medina soldier who be in your mind again. I caused the rain to hell with snow, earthquake in the whirlwind. Chicky-eyed Asiatics, true and living mathematics. Coming through the static dungeons, raiding devil's addicts. Man them off in one go plan them, plan for the murder. Have you ever heard or not? Tell me what's the word. Bombing all you faggots, man who follow Jimmy Swagger. Got the little youth sticking grins in their head. While you're headed to the beast, now the beast that made him savage. Tucking away them shitty ass blunts, done that before the babbage. Bumping on the fluff in the gods I trust. New Warlord clan knotting up the place, your brain is dust like dust. In the 2200 miles they walk, fuck the robber, I will bar, fumble clock, shitty talk. Put them up in one go catch me, God, you best bow down. To King Self-Allah, master, I rule everything around. My circumference always hot, watch your ass evaporate. Take the shit out your bitch while your ass percolate. Hate the evil in the living manifestation. Been in more black holes than Mr. Maximilian. So one, bring them style of line, no for cause division. Shredding nights like Wolverine from Michigan. We're coming like this, get it. Every day that he starts out, when you try cross the border. Every day I'm on fire, when you try test the water. Every day that he starts out, when you try cross the border. Every day I'm on fire, when you try test the water. Represent to the fullest. Reaching for my level, you like the gravitational pulling. University speaking, a man is true and divine soldier. With my style down versatile to wake your ass like soldiers. Niggas playing free pebbles, little master dropping boulders. Dicks on the pound and blackjack still can't reach me. President to teach me, please. Jacking heathens, that's my Steve. Niggas all fall at me when we crush them theories. Got no shit you talking, niggas like a barge in the breeze. Your religion's all twisted, living them last prophecies. In the culture of hip hop, civilized Jews run the sound like my righteous brother Jesus cutting heads of devils around. Marijuana smalls, maintaining Stonehenge. Nigga challenge one son, I got your brains for revenge. Stay late, his ass a masochist, a damn boxy plane. 12 niggas, one cop is still running, worth the shame. Just a fucking pussy boy, all on my nutsack. Why your ass believing and following, I'm knowledge and actual facts. Got your poop shit and telling my story in the way of Caucasian history. Black man that a god York, so tell the real story. Women hotting up the place, we leave them dead to fucking trace. From the crash to the jazz with the violence from my race. Women hotting up the place, leave them dead to fucking trace. From the crash to the jazz, falling, we'll learn some again. Every day there's these slaughter when you try cross the border. Every day I'm on fire when you try test me water. Every day there's these slaughter when you try cross the border. Every day I'm on fire when you try test me water. Tell them again, God. Every day there's these slaughter when you try cross the border. New world order class. Every day I'm on fire when you try test me water. Millennium, true self. Every day there's these slaughter when you try cross the border. Oh, every day I'm on fire when you try test for water. It's a tribute to my leader and teacher, the most revolutionary black man in the history of America. Shiny bald head, Khalid Abdul-Muhammad. Man, I'm so fed up with all the facts in this world. Love my earth, but polygamous more than one girl. Wartime got me heated. Governments commanded, conquered holy wars. In effect, and George Bush be the sponsor. I'm sick of that. Shine up, make up, clip that you want. Evils of this world of God wrote the scripts for that. So maintain the black, keep your mind right. So here, study that. Actual facts, understand that this God man is black. Actual fact, new Black Panther party never whack. Hitting back, bust a cop's ass, son, with a bat. And after that, Spear Jack Hammer to his drafted back. Look him in his eyes, tell him that's what he get for that. I will snatch you, beat you down, kick, bruise, and bat you. I have to break your molecules and regraft you. You stink suit, in your gutter hole, you white spook. Off-duty cop, kicked in the mouth with my boots. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. Building back liberation on me, never hit and miss. The first time take out your target, I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. Building black.
It's not letting me turn the mic around, turn the camera around. God damn it. Y'all hear that thunder?
Liberation on me, never hit and
Yo, it's getting ready to pour down out here. I'll be back at y'all in a second.
Man, I'm so fed up with all the facts in this world. Love my earth, but polygamous more than one girl. Wartime got me heated. Governments commanding conquered whores. In effect, and George Bush be the sponsor. I'm sick of that. Shine up, make up a clip that you want. Evils of this world of God wrote the scripts for that. So maintain the black. Keep your mind right. So here, study that. Actual facts, understand that this God man is black. Actual fact, new Black Panther party never whack. Hitting back, bust a cop's ass, son, with a back. And after that, spin jackhammer to his crafted back. Look him in his eyes, tell him that's what he get for that. I will snatch you, beat you down, kick, bruise, and bat you. I have to break your molecules and regraft you. You stink suit, in your gutter hole, you white spook. Off duty cop, kicked in the mouth with my boots. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. Building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time they got your targets. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. Building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time take your tongue as I pound the ground. Concrete still erupting, you're blazing. I'm still amazing, no interruption, no hesitation to take a house nigga's head. Cause I'm sick of these cooning niggas with them pretty ass dreads. And I'm sick of hitting these songs, every verse is full of lead. And I'm sick of the radio keeping our babies misled. And I'm sick of these faggot niggas come dripping on your face, on your knees for this cracker, can't stay in your own ways. And I'm sick of these happy niggas with these happy meal deals. And these Jewish ass labels don't love you for real. And I'm sick of every rapper claiming he poppin' still. He's a bitch for real. You never dreamed to kill. You're living back in us. Black Panthers making bush scoping us. Walking through the path. Harriet, Tubman set for us. Go through the math. Revolution, man, is a must. We have come to clash everything that's irrelevant. I'm a warrior. Trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist. Trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. Building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time take out your targets. I'm a warrior. Trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist. Trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. Building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time take out your target. As my course maintain to always remain black. Creep the other night, a devil named Jill got jacked. Big time boss man, run to the crossway. You put the steel in his mouth, take his wife and his ends, kill the hoe at the hotel to spend up all his ends. I used to sleep in the street, so I don't need no fucking friends. All your class won't be fitting me, but still be loving your enemy. Residing in stupidity, but for my foes, I got no pity. Rapping out for dead, doing them and moving out my city. But I've been watching back up with them niggas who want to go stick me. Niggas staying stuck, everyone them getting shifty. Got body getting funky, now they call me Mr. Shitty. Because the hydro skunk and backwards sweets. Eyes red as fire, now I'm ready to crush your fleets. And Mayday, Mayday. Now it's time to kill the beast. A new world order clan. No, I know no man up from the east. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionist. I'm building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time. Take out your targets. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionists. I'm building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time. Take out your targets. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionists. I'm building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time. Take out your targets. I'm a warrior, trained by Khalid Muhammad. I'm a terrorist, trained by the Black Panther Party revolutionists. I'm building black liberation armies, never hit him. It's the first time. Take out your target. Well, if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now I'm gonna tell your friend, I'm gonna tell everybody. Say that this one not the standpoint, but the stampede. Now the informer, keep a watch on me. Them a tell C, cipher boys and that we not see. Them a tell COP about me equality. And stay by man, feel nigga like me. Just a one way, me case, shoot me down badly. Once I Lord fit dead, then the news pon me. I'm coming on me push talk, Bobby picnic. Give thanks, give praise to Marcus Garvey. Say 1986, I find so mentally. Now me coming on the dance as a top celebrity. Now me coming on the dance as a G-O-D. Now me coming on the dance with Panther Party. Now me make all the pussy them free from me. Now me dice up the area party. Make a whole body get fear roll she body. Make a whole body girl fear roll up on me. Make she scream out my name K-I-N-G. Let me chat for the people them universally. But them I go try. Them not know we study. But if you knew what all the class. Now the place RT. Well if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now run go tell your friend, run go tell everybody. Say this one not the standpoint, but the stamping. Well, if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now I'm gonna tell your friend, and I'm gonna tell everybody. Say this is not the standpoint, but the stamping. Long time for rhythm and say me at no play. Educate the youth and say bless every day. When the righteous feed no fire Babylon way. Rebel soldier, crown king lead the way. King Selassie I live on Italian place. Sun, moon and star, that's a flag out we raise. Look on we God, you no see no pale face. The blessed Father, blessed Uma give grace. Tell Uma earth, give her thanks, give her praise. Tell all me people Babylon need a stray. Just a warning, 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 warning. Come take all the people away. Man chatty but of hypocrisy. Women nice up the rhythm intelligently. Walk on the land that's a 7-0-D. Now me clean up me yard but the blind now see the bad bite. Snaky. Political system bow down to the knee. When me fire on the bow sky flashy. When me patronage so Lord they make my pray. No homeless and no pure poverty. Couple lost man on me back in slavery. Well if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now run go tell your friend and run go tell everybody. Say this one not the standpoint but the stampede. Well if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now run go tell your friend and run go tell everybody. Say this one not the standpoint but the stampede. Well if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now run go tell your friend, run go tell everybody. Say this one not the standpoint but the stampede. Well if you see me with me posse, me stamp on the land as a G-O-D. Now run go tell your friend, run go tell everybody. Say this is not the standpoint but the stampede. Black power, gangsta. To all ganja man them. Big up, we know. Salute. Never wanna smoke them boats. Never wanna smoke them boats. Run them out. Smoke it up, my friend. Hear this. We smoke marijuana. Yeah. It's the natural life that the marijuana brings. We smoke the good ganja. It puts a smile upon my face, so when me rolling up that thing. We smoke marijuana. It's the natural life that the ganja weed bring. We smoke the sensibilia. It puts a smile upon my face, so when me rolling up that thing. When you take a little trip, I might not bring a bag along. Driving up and down I-95 and slipping on me yacht. Ganja business run America, but crack kills man. When the judges smoke with lawyers, smoke it with the doctor and prosecutor joke. My youth me tell you all of them are told. Ganja business used to run a Babylon, but now they go. Ganja baby from a Spanish town, banana leaf me smoke. Smell aroma, enemy gate, so now the city got your rope. In the morning, need a toast, but Lord, me smoke it all the road. Now me up, they call me big, I dread, we put me in the scope. Sour diesel, I'll be bun with marijuana, smalty coast. Setting fire to me, touch would never leave the ganja marijuana break. Me smoke the good ganja. Me put a smile upon me face so when me rolling up that tea. Me smoke marijuana. It's the natural light that the ganja weed we bring. Me smoke the sinsemilla. Me put a smile upon me face so when me rolling up that tea. A sweet sinsemilla. Oh, when me rising on the morning, thanks and praising me roll it. It feels so good, with me with them big gal like man took it when me stroke it. Me copy from the Rasta. Now just legalize the herb and let the ganja farmer load it. Me chocolate indica. A soap under power ways with knowledge, truth and king soul is the bubblegum flavor. We call it equality, so I pass it to me neighbor. When we blaze up shower, we giving thanks to the rise to me people in slave labor. We could be glaucoma, or you can drink it in your tea, eat brownie and rolling paper. You break up the azer. As marijuana smells in other place, we smoke it with no relation. We smoke marijuana. It's the natural life that the marijuana brings. We smoke the good ganja. We put the smile upon my face so when we rolling up that tea. We smoke marijuana. It's the natural light that the ganja weed we bring. We smoke the sinsemilla. We put the smile upon my face and when we rolling up that tea. Smoke it up, ganja load the session up, on me up, smoke it up. Ganja load them back with man fi come me up, smoke it up. Tapping on the each me I go please. Me up, smoke it up. Talking to me eyes and them up bleed. Me up, smoke it up. Lord have mercy, need me sense and weed. Me up, smoke it up. Tell them deep and flip a chicken feet. Cause me no smoke it up. Keep the boogie woogie full of seeds and watch the smoke it up. Keep it to me purple, brown, or green. And watch me smoke it up. And homie smoke it up. Cause we gon' smoke it up. And then I'll be smoke it up. Because we smoke marijuana. It's the natural light that the marijuana brings. We smoke the good ganja. We put the smile upon my face so when me rolling up that tea. We smoke marijuana. It's the natural light that the ganja weed we bring. We smoke the sinsemilla. We put the smile upon my face so when me rolling up that tea.
Peace and Black Power family. Welcome to another episode of Black Survivor Diet Series, broadcasting live every Warrior Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm the host of the National Minister of Defense of the Black Riders Liberation Party under the leadership of our five-star General Taco Wolverine Shakur and the National Deputy Field Marshal for the New Black Panther Party for Self-Defense under the leadership and auspices of the National Chairwoman, General Crystal Muhammad, speaking none other than the Black Dragon of this day and time himself, Minister King Samir Shabazz. Welcome to the class. As you saw earlier, the minister is on location conducting some training getting everything together out there. Got some fam with him. He's working with some youth. He's working with some people that are serious and getting adept in this particular lifestyle. So there's definitely a lot of things going on. So I'm going to stand in for him at this particular moment. Yesterday was the transition day of one of our warriors, one of our Sappos, Geronimo Pratt. And we're going to send a warrior salute and honor to him and to his divine warrior family. And we're going to read from Inyasa Sim, Calendar Revolutionary Daily Thoughts, and a couple other points from a couple other books. And we're going to deal with this from a standpoint and a perspective of African liberation. Yesterday, we were celebrating my solar return, and we had in the Sappho celebration. So we had the Warriors on, we had Minister King Samir Shabazz on, and my brother Omawali from United Front. Three to God way. And the bill was so heavy, I forgot what day it was. I thought it was Wednesday. Thought it was Warrior Wednesday. And so in the midst of all of the other festivities that took place yesterday, we took time to clear the air and to make things very plain in regards to where we are, where we stand. So I don't need to get into any of that today. So that spirit, that revolutionary spirit, that African liberation spirit, that African sovereignty spirit was very, very, very heavy. And yeah, we understand why. We understand from the Tulsa race riots that began on May the 31st, 99 years ago, and ended yesterday, June 2nd, 99 years ago, that energy never dies. That energy never dies. It simply changes form. And this is what we know. This regeneration, this insurrection spirit, that force and power and will, that unwillingness to allow our enemies to simply decimate us with no response is something that never happened in African life. We often depict African people as meek and humble people, peaceful people. African people are warrior people. We are warrior people. Peace is established through war and regulation. Peace is the absence of confusion, and on the battlefield there is no confusion unless you begin to convolute and confuse the battlefield. When you're confused about who your enemy is, there's confusion on the battlefield. If you're confused about what is to be done with your enemy, there is confusion on the battlefield. If you're seeking to make allies with part of the people that are your enemies, there is confusion on the battlefield. And in this revolution, there can be no confusion. So let me just read this today, because I didn't even get through the whole explanation on yesterday. The conversation was so powerful, and it was invigorating. Let's go to June 3rd. Again, I'm reading from Inyasa Sem, Calendar of Revolutionary Daily Thoughts by Jenga Living Ancestor, Baba Dr. Wali Kebomani Baruti. You can get this book and all of his other books from www.akabanhouse.com. So let's get into this explanation. How can Western human and historical sciences, born, cultivated, and defined by other peoples in an alien socioeconomic context, offer useful and effective service to African people worldwide? Their existential realization, their problems, aspirations, and projects. This is a question. I'm going to read it again. It's a quote, but it's a question. How can Western human and historical sciences born, cultivated, and defined by other peoples in an alien socioeconomic context offer useful and effective service to African people worldwide, that their existential realization, their problems, aspirations, and projects. And this is from Abdias do Nascimento. Let's get into Bob's explanation. As a politicized entity that thrives on the conquest and oppression, the European nation has advanced their science in a particular direction. Their weird science as a weapon designed to help enforce itself into the position of defining all people and nature in any way that suits their own troubled acyclic imperatives. The politics that guide their science are hell-bent on globally institutionalizing their particular interpretation of reality as the universal way. The idea of progress for the sake of change and any change that is driving energy behind this theme. Therefore, the science is obligated to blindly rush in any direction that would appear to elevate their way above others. In this blatantly disdainful, racist political climate, any traditional, natural, non-Eurocentric cultural philosophy, cannot be used to scientifically explain natural order. If the science begets truth, and Europeans are controlling the science that defines what questions and answers are to be asked and answered for all people in their quest for universal truth, then Europeans control the interests and options and therefore truth of all people. The affirmation reads, I think from an African centered scientific mind. The affirmation states, I think from an African centered scientific mind. The affirmation states, I think from an African centered scientific mind. And we are on the day of understanding. And understanding is to see things clearly for what they are and not for what they appear to be. So when we are looking at our condition, the state of condition in which we find ourselves, and we're looking for a remedy, how then can we go to our enemies, any of them, all of them? How can we go to anybody other than ourselves to solve the problems of the conditions that we're in? You're looking at the entire planet that maximizes, that capitalizes, and that thrives off us being in this state and condition. They feed their families off of feeding us bad food. They feed their families off the indoctrination of their schools. They feed their families off of the exploitation in the capitalist family system. All of them. They maximize, they capitalize, and they thrive off African people being in a dispossessed, interdependent position. And we are looking for enemies amongst ourselves. We will go and fight this enemy that looks just like us, excusing and looking past everyone else. We're looking for allies amongst our enemies. We use their political thought, cultural behavior and ideology and act as if we are devoid of all these things. We act as if African cultural thought and political perspective is not a remedy for African people. So, from this African center, we must approach, because as Dr. Remember Ani states, culture is a people's immune system. You want to know how to actualize your experience, it's actualized through your cultural lens. If you want to know your worldview stems from your cultural core competencies. How you communicate, how you actualize your experience, how you interface with those departed from your physical sight, your connection to nature, your connection to the creator. All of these things, they come from your culture. So if your culture is your way of life, if you are not living your culture, you have just introduced a way of death and genocide and menticide and spiricide to your people, introducing into their thought stream, into their psyche, and ballsing into their mind that they are not enough. We look in the mirror daily and allow the negative self-talk to come in and say, we are not enough. We are not in the position, nor are we capable of solving our own problems. We have to go beg someone to help us. We feel excited. We feel inspired. We feel more motivated when our enemies come amongst us, when they come into our organizations, when they organize with us, when they show up with their fucking money. All of these things, we become motivated. We become more inspired when it's us solely. We do not look to ourselves as our savior. We do not look to ourselves as our savior. We do not look to ourselves as our savior. We look to ourselves in a degenerate, lowly, oppressed state and say we cannot possibly be responsible for our liberation. We allow this negative self-talk to create divisiveness and division amongst us. We take on the deaf culture of the world, all of the stuff that they make, and they create something in the psyche where we're looking at ourselves in an inferior state and condition, and we don't want it if we made it, if we created it. Just like we don't want our children, because we send our children to our enemy schools to be educated. We send our families to grocery stores and get produce from people who hate us, who are looking to kill us, who hunt us down, who rob our families. And then we come back and we look at the dispossessed people, the despised and the rejected, the last, and look for enemies amongst us, enemies amongst our family. We smile and wave at our enemies daily. We make our children speak to them when they speak. We let them touch our children and all this other sick, retarded shit we do. We make sure that they get the utmost respect. And then we disrespect our children as we subject them to that spirit side. The spirit dies. They recognize their enemy, they look at them in their face, and they're prepared to kill them. And then they hear from us this negative self-talk about who we are versus who they are. We always bring into the conversation, you cannot speak to heal a fractured psyche with comparative language. I'm going to say that again. You cannot prepare a fractured psyche with comparative language. What do I mean? If you're in your house and you have children, each child is unique. Each child has their own gifts. Each child has their own contributions to the family. If you want to cause a war in your family amongst your children, compare them. Don't prepare them, because if you don't prepare them, compare them. How come you can't just be like, boom, fill in the blank? And it's a war that you will never see, but you will look at it closely every day. You will see the effects of the war in your household that you created with your mouth. So when you look at the global economy is thriving off the benefit of the permanent underclass called the African in America. The global economy, everybody on the planet is capitalizing off of our discord and destruction and our disdain for one another and our family war, this genocidal war that is taking place. Those amongst us who think that European cultural thought and behavior is the order of the day, that the order of the day is to assimilate, is to integrate, is to find yourself with anybody other than yourself. To find yourself with anything or anyone other than yourself. To esteem them as the chief good. And to invite them to be the disposer of your affairs. All of these things, all of their institutions, all of their family businesses thrive off of our inability to see ourselves in the light that we're supposed to. So when you're talking about approaching things from an African-centered scientific mind, you can clearly see who your enemy is. Your enemy is the opposite of you. Your enemy is the opposite of you. But if you have your enemy's cultural thought, ideology, and behavior, your enemy is using you to destroy you. You are a double agent in your destruction. You are a willing or unwilling participant in your destruction. How you think, what you think, what you say, who you say it to, how you say what you say. All of these things are being controlled by your enemy, and you think in your mind that it is coming from you. The parasite has to convince the host that the host cannot live without the parasite. And the parasite stays with the host body until the host is near death, leaves that body and finds another place to dwell. The more powerful the host body is, the more empowered the parasite is. Our enemies never need to be present as long as their advocates are. There are advocates amongst us who will fight and kill and die defending our enemies, internal and external, foreign and domestic. There are people amongst us who need to be eradicated. Everybody jumps for joy with that statement. Yeah. Some of these niggas, they gotta go. I'm just being honest, yo. They just gotta go. What about your motherfucking enemies? What about the rest of them that are on that list? What about the rest of them that are on that list? What about the rest of them? What are you going to do about the rest of them? You can't wait to kill those from amongst you. You got no heart for your enemy. Every time somebody get close to one of our enemies, here comes some goddamn body trying to step in the goddamn way. Physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, verbally, whatever the case may be. This is not who we are. This is not where we come from. Always these conversations about us, no conversations about our enemies. Let me read this shit one more time. I love this. Strictly speaking, an African nationalist enemies are any person. Any person. Baba is very clear about this. Any person living, dead, or yet to be born, who in any way did, is or will work to prevent African people from being liberated, empowered, and sovereign. How the fuck do you do that? Working with your enemies. How the fuck do you do that? Seeking to make unholy alliances with your enemies. How do you do that? Looking to make concessions and inclusion and having this soft heart about your enemies. How does that work? How does that work? You don't know anything about your people. This is how that works. When you don't know anything about who you are, aside from titles attributed to you, I'm talking about your damn family dynamic. You got to send your saliva to your enemies to find out who you are. And you boasting about sequencing and where your enemy says they stole your ancestors from. Your genetic memory is wiped. Your connection to your glorious past in your family line is gone. This is the robbery. This is the greatest robbery. Your first spiritual inclination, your first religion, the oldest religion in the universe is family. You come from the family of the Creator. You don't even know your family lineage. That's a robbery. You have to go to somebody, you have to pay them money, you got to give them your fucking saliva and say, where do I come from? Who am I? When you don't know who you are, you don't know where you came from, you don't know your family name, what's the scientific diagnosis for that? What is that called? Amnesia. Amnesia. So you're dealing with psychological, spiritual amnesia. So now you have to rely on your captors to tell you. You have to rely. I don't got to use liars no more. Can't use liars. No, you don't have to use racist. Just use white. White. This is white cultural thought and behavior. So you talking about people who got amnesia, who don't know who you are and where you come from. Then you got to rely on somebody else to tell you. They say, "Oh, where you live?" I don't know. What's your name? I don't know. They can't identify you. You don't know. You got to go to somebody and pay them. Look at the detriment to the psyche that creates. You can't tell your children where your ancestors come from. Not nobody else's ancestors. Your ancestors come from. You can't tell them. You point to a state. You point to a state. You can't point to a country. You can't point to nothing. You can't. You were ill-equipped to look at yourself and see who you are. You can't see those generations that preceded you. That's a robbery. That's one of the greatest robberies on the planet, if not the greatest robbery on the planet. Your family. Your family. Your mother, your father, your grandmother, your grandfather, your great-grandmother, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandmother, your great-great-grandfather, that lineage. You got to give somebody some spit and let them examine it in a lab and run sequencing and guess where you're from and guess who you are. You have to guess. Many of us already don't know about one side of the family or the other, whether you grew up with no mother or no father, or you grew up with no mother or father. You grew up in this foster care system called America. And the greatest robbery to your psyche is to not know who you are and not know who your family is. That's the greatest robbery to your psyche. To not know who you are and who your family is. So anybody that shows you any kind of attention, not love, anybody who shows you any kind of attention, you attach yourself to them. So you find yourself in these situations where someone shows you attention. And this is where you find yourself. Going from one place to another place, from one place to another place, seeking that attention, longing for it. Look at the virtual situation. Look how the virtual situation commits to the enabling of a fractured mind. You put up a post and you check how many people liked your post, how many people shared your post, how many people interacted with something that came from your thought mind. When you're not fulfilled in who you are, this becomes an addiction. This becomes a coping mechanism to exist in a space and place that is oppressive. A place that is hell for you. This is hell. This is why the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad psychologically called this place the hells of North America, the hells of North America, the poor part of the planet Earth. To not have you in a space where you are longing to be connected to a place where your ancestors were killed and burned and raped and mutilated, hung from trees. To not be connected with to a landmass where their blood was shed. The psychological trauma that exists in the mind of the African. robbed of their family, robbed of our family connection. Our ancestors in bond service as captives, as prisoners of war, or blended families. And that universal connection, when you look at it from the African centered scientific mind, we are all one people, African people. So no matter who came to your house, they were family. This is where the amalgamated, bastardized American foster care system comes from. A science of devastation with stealing African people from our homeland and stealing African people from our homes. Social services come to your home and remove you from your home. Social services make being from your birth parents optional. What does it do to your psyche? Look at the psychology of the positive and negative self-talk. Look at the negative self-talk that exists between the relationships of Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora. Look at the negative self-talk. You're here in America, proud to be American, and you were never fucking an American because in your mind, your birth parents, your birth mother didn't want you. Your birth mother gave you away. This is the stories that they tell you. And this is what you keep in your heart because it allows you to be justified in your disdain for who you are and where you come from. They tell you that your birth mother gave you up. They tell you that your birth mother gave you up for adoption. So now your captor looks like your savior. Your captor looks like your savior. Just like with all of this shit that's going on right now. Your captor looks like your savior. Your captor looks like your savior because your savior is marching next to you. Your captor looks like your savior because your savior is handing you picket signs. Your savior is spray painting on buildings and burnt up cars that Black Lives Matter. Now they matter to you because your savior said so. You feel justified. You feel vindicated. Because, again, you're looking and longing for your family connection that you don't have. They tell you Mother Africa gave you up. They tell you Mother Africa sold you into bond service. This is what they tell you. They feed this into your psyche. And now there's a splinter or a cut, a severing of ties from your umbilical cord, your ancestral umbilical cord, and where you exist. So anything that has a semblance or a reminder of that traumatic experience based upon that psyche, you openly reject it. You openly reject your connection back to your birth mother because you say your birth mother didn't want you. You regurgitate and you repeat what your enemy told you historically about your birth mother. You don't know your birth mother. You don't know your birth mother. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you came from. You don't know your parents. You don't know your ancestral parents. And other people who are hurt and their psychology is damaged and bruised, they say the same shit to you. Oh, you're African? What part of Africa you come from? What's your tribe? What's the language that you speak? They are hurt in their mind. And they express those things outwardly to you directly. They let you know that they are just as damaged and bruised as you are. So when you're talking about this psychology with this negative self-talk, it gets continually perpetuated through the things that you take in. They showed you pictures, they showed you videos, they showed you movies, they showed you cartoons, all of this to show you and have you being thankful for being bond servants, for being captured and being kidnapped, and thanking the creator that you are in this place of servitude, of bondage, of death and devastation. There's nothing none of these people could do in the street that will ever match what has been done to us. Nothing. Nothing. But with the goldfish memory and the miracle of the body, when you're in such a traumatic experience, it seeks to erase it from your memory natural to keep you in a state of balance, in the state of homeostasis. It goes and hides until you're ready to deal with it. So when we're talking about the psychosis of this Eurovasion of the mind, these are the things that seep deep within the psyche. And we see this in how this moves out in every facet and aspect of our being when we don't know ourselves. So if we in this Black Survive or Die class, when we talk about the psychology of survival, this is the fundamental point of it. If you don't know who you are, you won't fight for your survival. You'll think that in order for you to survive, somebody who looks just like you gotta die. And you're parasitic in those moves. So when you look at the psychology of this negative self-talk, when you look in the mirror, this is what you see. When you look inside the depths of your soul, this is what you see. When you look inside the depths of your spirit, this is what you see. This is why Dr. Bobby E. Wright talked about menticide. You die here first, and it manifests outwardly. And when someone comes to you with positive self-talk about yourself, the hatred in your heart for not knowing your birth parents manifests, and the most volatile verbal jousting, and often ending in physical altercation or death. Defending your captors with this Stockholm syndrome called America, with this foster parent syndrome called America. I was talking to one of my brothers a few years ago, and I talked about Cinderella, the fairy tale, and the evil stepmother and stepsisters. I talked about abusive relationships and that psychology, and how the cycle, this repetitive cycle, continues. I talked about Stockholm syndrome. And I talked about the relationship with the African in America and the Africans all over the planet, and the Africans on the mother continent. Everybody has their Cinderella story, because those wicked stepsisters are everywhere. Their wicked stepmother is everywhere, implanting and supplanting these things in the African psyche. In order for Africans on the continent to immigrate over here, they have to be separate from us. We've been taught and trained all of our lives to be separate from them. Even if it was in jest, because of the pain that is associated with coming from your birth parents. They always will show you a picture of you in a compromising position. These them Africans y'all talking about? These them Africans? These the ones you great they ain't even got fucking clothes on. You start to revert to the default program setting. Africans don't really like us. They don't really fuck with you. You ain't no African. All of these things into your psyche. All of them. They all have a resonance, a space, and a place there. But who put those thoughts there? Who whispered into the heart and mind of African people and made us separate? The rest of the world benefits from the psychological work that was done. From the psychological work that was done over a period of 6,000 years. A grafting process that took place. A mental, emotional, and psychological grafting process in general. And 400 years in specific right here in the Hells and Smells of North America. So this is the psychology that we walk around with and that we interface with one another as. The same kind of mind, the psychology of doubt, the psychology of fear, the psychology of emotional irregularity, irrational thoughts, grandiose thoughts, submitting to our captors. And we want to be the oppressors to one another. Anything other than confrontation with our enemies. And if you don't know who you are, you won't know who your enemies are. So this is the psychology that we're working with and that we have been working, myself, 20 years, King Samir, the last 30 years or more, to break the psychological interdependent hold that African people have on everybody other than African people. It takes work. It takes sacrifice. They go to your enemies and report on you. They go to your enemies and work for them. They go to our enemies and become advocates for our enemies. So when we're talking about this Black Survivor Die class, we're looking at it directly. We're looking at it directly in the face and say that choice is yours. Because we can only work with the willing. Those who are not willing will be eradicated. So I'm going to stop right there. Make sure y'all tune in next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for this Black Survivor Die class. In the words of King Samir, I love you more than you hate your black self. Black power.